Hey, well, thank you everybody for joining us. It's 12 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. I'm Josh Blank. I am a professor at the University of California, Irvine School of Law. I teach corporate tax, federal income tax, tax practice and procedure, and I've been at UC Irvine since 2018. Prior to joining UC Irvine, I taught at NYU Law School in its graduate tax program for many years. I'm thrilled today to be moderating our panel, Beyond the Code, Careers in Tax Law Explained. This is hosted by the ABA Tax Section, which is an organization we'll actually have a chance to talk about at different points today. But this program is really designed for all of you as students who are first starting to think about potential careers in tax. We want you to get a sense of different paths that practitioners have taken and from different points in their career. Some of our participants have practiced or have served as judges for several years. Others are just getting started, so you'll get a sense of how a career can develop and why people might be interested in tax, and hopefully that will help you as you start to think about your path. And as I said, we'll also have a chance to give you a sense of ways you can get involved in tax law beyond just the Internal Revenue Code. There are organizations that are really important to at least be aware of when you start your career. The ABA Tax Section, I think, is one of them. I can say that from my own experience, and also I know many of my students have had that experience as well. And so I think I can just get us started by at least introducing our panel, and then I know this is a webinar, so you can't shout out questions, but I have questions prepared that I think I'm going to ask on behalf of all of you as students out there joining us this afternoon. So first, we're honored to have Judge Vasquez with us. Judge Vasquez is senior judge on the U.S. Tax Court. He was first appointed by President Clinton as judge of the United States Tax Court and sworn in 1995. He has served on the tax court for many years. He assumed senior status in 2018 and continues to perform judicial duties as senior judge on recall. We're also joined by Lily Lequang, who's an associate at Ropes and Gray in San Francisco. She joined the tax practice right after graduating law school in 2022, and she advises private equity and other clients on tax aspects of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, dispositions, and lots of other transactional matters. When she was in law school, Lily interned with the California Office of Tax Appeals and externed with the California Franchise Tax Board in the Tax Administration and Procedure Bureau. And last, we're joined by Tom Borec, who is going to be able to provide a completely different perspective in terms of possibilities in tax. Tom is the former head of tax at Dermavant Sciences. He is somebody who has a lot of experience as a global head of tax and tax executive in different industries where he has held an executive role and advisory role. He has driven high impact strategies at Fortune 500 companies, including eBay, biotech firms, startups, privately owned companies, and the Big Four. And so thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. And with that, I thought we could just dive right in with a question I think some of our students might already be thinking about, or maybe they even know the answer to. If I could ask each of you, just to begin, why did you decide to pursue tax law as a career? Judge Vasquez, could I start with you?
Yes, actually, it all started in Los Angeles. And I graduated in 1972 with a degree in accounting from the University of Texas in Austin. And I went to work. At that time, we had what they call the Big Eight accounting firms. Well, I think I call them now, I call it the Final Four. But anyway, there was a company called Libron, Ross Brothers, and Montgomery in Los Angeles that I went to work for as a financial accountant in 1972. And a year later, they took their international name was Coopers and Lybrand. And later they became, after their merger, I guess they're now PwC. So that's kind of shortened it. But during my 2 years that I was at at Lyman Ross Brothers in Montgomery. During the tax season, they would invite us pencil pushers, that they would what they would call us, because we were financial auditors. They would invite us to come over and prepare tax returns for the the firm's clients under the supervision of a senior in the tax department. And I started preparing tax returns for clients. They were simple returns, I'm sure, but that got me so excited about tax. I volunteered the second year also that I was there at Coopers and Lybrand. And then I loved it so much that I decided I wanted to go back to law school and become get a tax law degree with the intention of going back to Coopers and Lybrand in Los Angeles, and that's how I got started in tax. But thank you.
Great. Thank you, Judge Vasquez. Lily, could I ask you, what drew you to tax?
So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got to law school. I was kind of open to anything, but during my 2L year, like probably a lot of students here, I decided to take federal income tax, purely out of personal reasons. I felt like at 24 years old, I should probably know a little bit about income taxes. And I ended up really liking the subject. I think during my 1L year, I felt like I didn't really connect to any of my kind of doctrinal classes. I just, in those classes, a lot of the time the answers is, it depends. Like the answers are just so open-ended. And I think that's what kind of frustrated me about tax or law school courses. But tax law, the tax code is so built out, it's so elaborate. I think a lot of the times you can navigate your way to an answer. It's not like easy, but and there aren't always answers, but I think I liked that aspect of tax law very much. And that's kind of what drew me to wanting to explore the practice. So I started, interning and externing at various tax organizations, and decided that that's what I wanted to do after graduation.
Thanks very much. Tom.
For me, it was U2, the band. So I was finishing my law school. I was again trying to figure out what I want to do. I want to do something international, and I was reading about, how they did some magic behind the scene to really capture the value, let's call it that way. And afterwards, I was just hooked. I went to Deloitte, I went to PwC, so yeah. And I was working for 10 years in the tax advisory, and it took me around the world. I did, so many different companies, different taxes, different territories. It was just fun.
Great. Well, thank you all for that answer just to get us started in terms of your background. Another background question I think would be helpful, especially for the students who are probably thinking about what classes to register for in the remaining time in law school. Could I ask each of you, and actually if you think about your career and how these have been valuable, are there specific classes that you now look back to and say, those were great classes that I took in law school? Maybe they weren't even tax classes necessarily, but what courses have been especially helpful to you in your career? Judge Vasquez, again, if I could start with you. Oops, I think you might just be muted there, Judge Vasquez.
How about
There
that?
you
Can you
go.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes. One thing I was going to say, I've been on the court now 30 years. During those 30 years, it'll be Cinco de Mayo 30, it'll be 30 years. But I've had 30 law clerks, 49 interns and externs and volunteers that have worked for me in the chambers. And so I've had 79 people that I've been able to mentor here at the court. So one of the things that I have found over the years interesting is that people have told me they didn't know they loved doing tax until they took their first course. So what I would say to all students, consider taking your first course in tax and see if you love it. If you love it, you're made for it, and you'll know whether you're. But in regards to courses that really helped me, When I was at NYU, I did the LLM program. I did take civil penalties in criminal procedure or criminal penalties, and that was a course that was taught by Michael Salzman at NYU at night, and it was a very good program because I had clients doing collection matters that really helped me. And I think the other course, non-tax course that was really helpful to me was taking the course evidence. Evidence is so important. When we conduct trials, what can come in, what is hearsay, exceptions like that, and also for people that are never thinking of coming into tax litigation. I think for a person, it makes you a better tax planner if you've taken some tax litigation or had some experience. Anyway, thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Lily, any specific courses? I know you're at the beginning of your career, but what courses have been helpful?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the obvious ones, if you want to do transactional tax, would be to take corporate tax, partnership tax, international tax. I think those have been really, really helpful to me. Even though the learning curve is extremely steep when you start practicing, I think kind of having that, basic knowledge when you start gives you like a little bit of confidence that you kind of know what people are talking about. And I think those are the obvious answers, but I think legal research and writing, even though I do transactional practice, there's a ton of legal research that we still do on the transactional side. And I think I still use IRAC to this day to lay out, my issues, the rationales, researching the law. And I think it helps me think through the issues, and it helps, whoever I'm conveying my conclusions to kind of see my thought process. And yeah, I know everyone has to take legal research and writing, but it does extend beyond, just law school exam writing.
Great, and a great point. A lot of people come to law school and they hear about taking tax and they immediately think only of tax forms and calculations and don't realize that being a tax lawyer still means you're a lawyer. So writing is very important. Tom, any courses that you look back on and say those were really great that I took?
Well, tax and understanding tax, and procedures, it's really important. But at my job, it's like a prerequisite. You need to have it, right? It's the basics, it's foundation. It's like given. You need to be really good at that. But then, as a global head of tax, you need to understand the financial impact of everything you do. So, how do you structure the companies? How do you set up the transactions? And then the final thing, which, it doesn't really matter how good you are, what an expert you are. If you can't communicate it, it's useless. So I would say any skills that help you to understand the financial impact and maybe also emotional impact of your decisions, which are legal decisions, and then any skills which improve your communication are a must. They will help so much. It's just, I wish I knew that 20 years ago.
Great. So thank you all. I think what would be helpful now is to kind of move to the present day. And I know you're each doing very different things, but for our students' benefit, I think that would actually be great to hear about the different paths. Maybe for a few minutes, could you just give us a sense of what your typical day is in your current professional role? And you can answer that however you like, but just to give us a sense of what you're doing, I think would be great for the students. And again, Judge Vasquez, I'll start with you.
As a judge on the tax court, we do a lot of opinion writing, and I work with my clerks and my staff. And if we're not in court, actually, I just had a trial session in Los Angeles in February, and I'm scheduled to be in a trial session in Los Angeles in April the 10th, I believe, the coming next month. And so we're always getting prepared because in about 3 weeks before the calendar call. So that's when we call all the cases set for trial for that 1 week or 2 weeks, for the 1 week that we're there. And we start studying the pre-trial memorandums in which the parties tell us the status of the cases. We always have at least 100 cases 5 months out before the calendar call, and as we get closer to probably 3 weeks from the calendar call, um, we're down to about 30 cases that haven't settled, but you can probably only try no more than 5 cases during that 1 week that you're there. So a lot of cases are going to settle, but some will try, but you never know which ones are which of the cases that are going to try, and so it's always either working on the trial during the calendar trials, getting ready for trial, or reviewing the briefs and or writing opinions. So every day is interesting because it's different. So and you never know what type of case you're going to end up in these calendars. I like to say going to trial sessions is a favorite term that I like to borrow from. You know, a trial session is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. That famous movie,
Yes.
Forrest Gump.
Well, thank you. Maybe to go all the way back to the beginning of the career path, Lily, could you tell us what's your day like at Ropes and Gray?
Yeah, so I think no day, like no 2 days kind of looks alike. I think probably if I had to kind of generalize it, I'd probably say like a third. Sorry, I think there's an echo.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think a third of my day is probably spent on calls. So those can be, external, internal, external being with, the client or opposing counsel if we're on a deal, or with a lot of the times it's with the accounting firms. So we work very closely with the big four accounting firms and other accounting firms as well. Internal calls that can be with just the tax team itself, the corporate team, and sometimes the executive compensation and benefits team. And then probably the rest of my day is spent working on drafting, so working on agreements, also putting together tax forms once in a while, things like that. So it very much varies day to day, and I think it also depends on kind of where we are in the timeline of a transaction. Yeah, just like with trial, you don't know what you're going to get. I guess with a transaction, depending on where you are, how close you are to signing or closing a transaction, can really impact what your day looks like.
Thank you. And Tom, your typical day.
I would say there is no typical day because but there are certain constants you need to be aware of. So as a head of tax, as a global head of tax, you need to be aware of everything that's happening around the world in every territory your company is involved. And then a lot of things are management, to be honest. It's speaking with CEO, with CFO, with CEO, understanding what their plans are, what's important to them, understand their values and their goals, and then translate this down the line to your team, but also to outsource experts. Because based on what the company's goals are, you need to do for your own company and your team the same things, and then you need to manage it properly. It's a lot of it is actually reviewing things as well, but even more is actually communicating with people. So, but in order to do that, you need to, I think the most important skill at this level is to be able to simplify and really, doing 40-page opinions down to one paragraph and then down to one sentence, because that's the attention span in the company.
Well, thank you. I think maybe now just for the students, it would be helpful to really get a sense of the type of tax matters that you all work on, obviously from different perspectives. I think it would be very helpful, Judge Vasquez, for the students to have a sense of what type of matters does the U.S. tax court hear? Are you only hearing matters involving individuals or corporations as well? Could you give us a sense of the type of matters that come before your court?
It's like the universe. I mean, there's we have so many of our cases are, well, to get jurisdiction into our court, the taxpayer has to be audited and have unagreed adjustments, and IRS issued a 30-day report during audit, and then finally the 90-day letter, which is notice of deficiency, which gives us jurisdiction if it's a valid notice of deficiency and the taxpayer files timely within 90 days. But the majority of our cases are substantiation cases. Uh, they about 90% of our cases are deficiency cases, and there are lower amounts that are owed, 10,000, 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, below 50,000. And they make up about 90% of our entire deficiency. But whereas 10% of the deficiency of the petitioners that are corporations or the big five or the big oil companies or you name it, the 500 Fortness, they're only about 10% of those taxpayers, but they account for like 90% of the total deficiencies in our. So we can get, that's what I was saying, is like a box of chocolates. We can get an international case, whether income earned in Antarctica, whether that's a foreign country, so they can get the earned income, the 9/11 exclusion, TAFRA partnerships or the new type of partnership audits. We can handle corporations. I've handled, including some of the big five or the big automakers. So we can get, dependency cases. We no longer have the dependency exemption, but the child tax credit is still tied into that, and the additional child credit. So we can end up with a $60 case, like I tried when I was with the government, or you can come up with a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar deficiency. So it's kind of like very like the universe. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. No, I
Thank you.
think it's especially for students who may not be familiar with the tax court, especially if they're only taking their first class. It's I mean, always striking to me to think that this one court is responsible for all the taxpayers and the country and the varied matters that you just heard the judge describe. It's certainly something to think about in terms of applying for clerkships, which I know we'll have a chance to talk about a little bit later, but also just to give you a sense of how vast the landscape is. Thank you for sharing with us. Lily, could I ask, now I know you gave us a sense of what the day is like, but what's a typical matter that you might be assigned as an associate at a large corporate law firm? I think, again, for our students who have not taken even corporate tax, they may not exactly have a sense. So anything you can do to explain what it is that you do as an associate would be very helpful.
Yeah, so I work on all types of transactional tax matters. So that can be, like you listed at the beginning, M&A, sales, restructurings, and also we do, Ropes and Gray does a lot of private equity work. So we also work on the fund side, which is putting together, like forming the private equity funds and kind of managing that, bringing in investors, things like that. And we're kind of have tax has its hands in everything. So we look at structuring those transactions to make sure that they're tax efficient and minimizing the tax consequences based on the structure that the client selects. And so I guess an example of something that I would work on, I would look at the merger agreement for a transaction, and tax kind of looks at everything. The corporate team asks us anytime there are numbers on the page, the corporate team will ask, can tax just take a look at this? So we look at all aspects of the merger agreement, and we look at the tax representations, which when we're buying a company, you look to see, the various representations that the company makes about its tax attributes and its tax yeah, all of those aspects of the company. And then we look at the tax covenants, for example, in the agreement as well, which kind of discuss what the go forward, attributes of the company are going to look like from a tax perspective. So we mark it up with our tax comments, and we are considered kind of a at most law firms, I think tax is considered a corporate support team. And so we're considered a specialist group amongst like IP, employment, and we provide the feedback from a tax perspective to the corporate team, and they kind of interlay that and they manage the rest of the transaction. So I think that's kind of an example of what one piece of what we do at a corporate law firm might look like.
A great overview. Thank you. And Tom, could you tell us about the type of tax matters that you're responsible for?
So I would say over the duration of my career, I moved around, right? I started at generalist, where I was essentially, as Judge Vasquez said, pencil pusher, started from the bottom, learned the ropes, and then I moved on. I did corporate taxes, setting up companies and corporations, transfer pricing, personal tax, everything, right? And then I said, okay, I want to specialize in something I haven't done before. At that time, VAT became really popular. So I spent a lot of time in VAT. I moved around to different countries because of VAT as well. And I must say, I'm really glad because it's still the most messed up tax ever. So, anything else, it's refreshing and it's fun. So, when I had to deal then with US taxes, it felt like, okay, I can do that. I've done worse. So, but essentially, I also did, for example, when I was at eBay, we were just at the time when Wayfair came out, when the sales tax was charged locally. We had the same movement in Europe as well for VAT and, in Canada, GST. And I was spending a lot of time working with OECD and European Commission and HMRC and also IRS, working out how we can actually tax this. So you do different things, and the more you do, the easier it gets, and the more you can do cross knowledge, cross pollination, and it just gets better and better. So whatever you do, I would say, think out of the box and get fresh experience in.
Great. Well, thank you for those answers, and I think gives our students a good sense of the possible matters that you might handle. Maybe to even just kind of zoom in a little bit further. Uh, Lily and Tom, could I ask you, what specifically do you do? What's your role in a typical transaction or matter? So first, just thinking about the law firm setting. And Lily, again, you can answer this however you like. I do think it's helpful for students to have a sense of even the pace, the hours. What is it like for you? Who are the people that you work with? And what is it specifically you're doing at this point in your career on a typical merger, let's say? What's your role?
Yeah, so I kind of gave a little bit about that in my previous answer, but like I said, we are considered a corporate support group. And so we kind of provide and review whatever the corporate team would like us to take a look at. We join any calls that they would like us to join. I think as a junior associate, kind of moving into a mid-level role, I think a big part of our responsibility is moving things along, just making sure that things don't slip through the cracks. So we're kind of responsible for that on our team. For example, I keep a running list for every deal that I'm on, I keep a running list of all of the items that are in our court, any documents that we still need to be reviewed. If I've reviewed them, if I've sent them up to the next person to review, if they've gone to the partner to be reviewed, whether they've gone to the corporate team. So I think just that's kind of as a newer attorney, that's the biggest value add that you have, is to keep things moving along. Obviously, we're very, as a newer attorney, you're not as experienced, so you're not always, you're obviously not leading the conversations when it comes to structuring and things like that. But you can help out your team a lot by making sure that things, continue to move, don't fall through the cracks. And so now that I'm starting to move towards a more mid-level role, I'm starting to have my own, first or second year associate. And so kind of managing from the middle has been a different adjustment for me. But yeah, I guess that's kind of a bit of insight on what our role looks like in a typical transaction.
And if I could just ask a quick follow-up, again, I'm doing this on behalf of the students. I know a question students always have is, well, I get to interact with clients. Even as a tax lawyer, do you interact with clients? And who is it exactly you're talking to if it's the client?
I think, yes, I think compared to a corporate associate, based on what I know from my colleagues, I think tax, you get to touch substantive issues so much earlier, and they always want to have, tax on calls with clients to do the explaining. And so I do have been able to interface with clients. It depends on the type of client. I think if it's a deal, we mostly interface, and we're working with private equity funds. They don't always have their own in-house tax people, so we just kind of interface with the deal team, and that requires kind of breaking down tax issues a lot more concisely for those who don't have as much knowledge about tax law. But when we work with public companies, for example, a lot of them have their own in-house tax teams, and so they're a lot more well-versed, and that we spend a lot more time being able to go back and forth on structuring and tax consequences, just because, yeah, in-house tax folks are very well-versed in those issues.
Great. And Tom, could you tell us a little bit about, as global head of tax, what would your role be on something like a transaction, like a merger or other a big transaction, or just in general, if you could describe your role a little more specifically for us, I think that would be helpful.
Let me explain you my career at Dermavant, because that's the whole transaction. So I was hired like 2.5 years ago because the company knew there will be an exit, right? It was a scale up with FDA approval. We had a successful product on the market in US, and we knew in biopharma somebody is going to buy us or we'll do the IPO. So I was hired specifically to look into the company as, and restructure the whole tax function, to look into it, look what we can optimize, what we can improve, and also to get ready for the inevitable merger and acquisition due diligence, right? Or IPO due diligence. In the end, there was actually M&A, but in the first 6 years, I was actually going down and understanding what all the transactions are, why we are set up like that, what we do. And I ended up in dual role. I was head of tax, but also head of global strategy, which means I was, working not when everything is set up, but when the things are set up, when the international supply chains are being set up. I was, with the knowledge I had on the company, and MBA was extremely useful. I was able to work with our operational people when we were setting up everything, because in tax, it's every time it's easier if you do it from upfront instead of doing correction afterwards, right? And during this time, we, optimized our R&D credits, we optimized our transfer pricing, we optimized our structure. And at the end, when there was M&A due diligence, I passed with flying colors, right? So the point is, as head of tax, there is nobody to hide behind. You need to know everything. You need to know your company. You need to know all the legislation, and you need to be able to communicate with your business people and explain them what's important. So yeah, you do everything.
Great. Well, thanks. And I think one theme we're hearing is tax seems to be uh, a lot of tax does seem to involve teaching. I mean, explaining, and that's a nice way to think about your role as a tax lawyer, especially You're explaining constantly to clients, to partners, to people who may be very sophisticated in all sorts of aspects of the business but have no tax background whatsoever. You're constantly teaching. And so, again, it might be something that suddenly you didn't even think about when you applied to law school, but could be a good fit if you're interested in teaching and you enjoy breaking things down into more simple concepts. Tax is a great area. Now I have a two-part question for everyone, and this is a big question. What is the most challenging aspect of your job, and what's the most rewarding aspect? And so I'll start with Judge Vasquez. Could you tell us about the hardest aspect of the job and the most rewarding aspect?
You know, conducting trials, and I'm talking about the part of actually where you're in trial. You remember the tax court conducts trials in 74 cities across America, including Hawaii and Alaska. And I've been to both. But in some of the issues in some of these cases is whether an activity under Code Section 183 is for profit, whether it's a photography or a boat operation or even whether you're even maybe whether you're carrying on the practice of being an attorney as an activity for profit, or you're trying to make a profit, or is it just a hobby, as the accountants call it? And then in civil fraud cases also, whether the taxpayer uh, intended to evade tax, and so therefore the penalty applies. We don't have criminal jurisdiction, but it's civil jurisdiction as to the penalties. But it's in these factual matters, you're always trying to determine who's being credible. Credibility is so at trial, I'm always paying attention to how the witnesses testify, including the petitioners, the lawyers, if they're called to testify, and any of the transactions that Tom and Lily talked about can end up in our court if they're audited by the IRS and there's disagreements. So it's always challenging to determine who's being credible. And I like to often cite to the case of Alfonso Diaz, D-I-A-Z, in which Judge Tannenwald described the essence of being a trier of fact. But so that's the challenging. The most rewarding is actually I've had, like I said, I've had 79, almost 80 interns, externs, clerks. That's one of the most rewarding things, working with young people that are so dedicated to tax and to their work, and also I enjoy being in the courtroom and hearing the trials. So those are rewarding. But thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Lily, the hardest and the most rewarding aspects of your job.
I think my answers are kind of like two sides of the same coin. So I think the most challenging aspect is probably how steep the learning curve is. I think I did expect, it to be very difficult when I came in, but, it still caught me off guard. I think I've been reassured by more senior associates who have told me, things don't really start to click until you're probably a fifth year associate, and then you kind of like have an aha moment. So, I'm still waiting for that aha moment. But I think that's just kind of the most challenging aspect. But I think on the flip side, it's very rewarding because I think every single day I learn something new. And like I mentioned earlier, as as a tax associate, you touch substantive issues like right when you come in. I think from my corporate colleagues, they spent the first like couple of years doing, mostly signature pages, things like that. And like you don't do any of that as the tax associate. You're immediately looking at tax issues, doing tax research, and working and marking up these documents. And so I think the most rewarding aspect is just how much you learn. I think every day, I come home and my brain is tired. And sometimes that feels really good. Sometimes it's exhausting, but I think there are pluses and minuses to both. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. And Tom.
So the most challenging aspect, it's not tax legislation by itself. I mean, it's challenging, right? But it's not the most challenging, because after 20 years in the profession, you either know the things or you know you will figure them out. And, I have like a vast network of people. I have literally 10,000 people in my LinkedIn outreach. I can reach out and discuss. And there are organizations like Tax Executive Institute, many other institutions you can ask and speak with colleagues and figure it out. And there is the big four. So I would say the tax aspect of the function, it's fine, it works. You can do it. You need to do it. It's like basics. The challenging aspect is actually working with people, because your leadership and anyone else in the organization, they don't know anything about taxes. So they rely on you, and you need to be able to translate from, tax technical to whatever it's relevant for them. But in order to be able to translate, you need to listen to them, be empathic, understand what they want, what's important to them. So that's the challenge. And the most rewarding thing is actually working with people, because once you accomplish this, it's such an amazing feeling of success. It's the best, really, So it's the coin, and the two sides are one side. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. And I guess I should have thought that, especially as tax lawyers, you are all clever enough to realize that something which is challenging can also be really rewarding. So that makes sense that for some of you, this is the same the same coin, as you said. One question I do want to follow up on is something that I think we haven't really had a chance to talk about, and students often aren't aware of this aspect of tax practice. Giving advice, writing opinions for clients, that often can be an important role for the tax lawyer. Maybe for Lily and Tom, if I could ask you, just from your perspective in practice, have you ever had to write a legal opinion in tax, or maybe your firm does and you've participated? Could you tell us anything about how that process works and how you or your firm get comfortable that you can write an opinion? And I'll stop talking because I could end up going on and on about all sorts of professional rules that apply. But again, I remember not even realizing this was an aspect of practice until I started at a law firm. So maybe Lily or Tom, if either of you want to start and just give us a sense of what the opinion is and how do you or your firm get comfortable that you can that you can issue one.
I can start. I also did not really realize that that was going to be a big part of the job. It's not the biggest part, and it doesn't happen that often where we have to issue a tax opinion. But one of the first assignments that I got when I got to the firm was to write a tax memo. And I kind of had thought, I left memos behind in law school. But so they, yeah, typically involve a lot of tax research, getting yourself up to speed on the law and the issues. And this one was for a pro bono client. So we were kind of advising them for a tax exempt client, advising them on whether they might have unrelated business taxable income, even though they are a tax exempt organization. So we, have to speak to the client, get the full set of facts, and then kind of apply that as you would, when everyone's familiar with writing an opinion. And for larger transactions, when we do write opinions, we also run them through the accounting firms that we work closely with. And a lot of them have, like their national offices have, certain positions that they will tend to take. And so I think just adding that level of comfort when we do issue an opinion, I think just making sure we check all of the boxes in that sense.
Thank you. And Tom, if I could ask you, I mean, I'll ask you the same question, or maybe you could tell us when you need a legal opinion. Go ahead.
So one thing what I learned while working with as US head of tax was there is a difference between opinions and memos. So opinion, it's like, it's like whoever writes, it's like as certain as it gets, right? Whereas memo, it's usually at the level or more likely than not. And most of the times, to be honest, we operate on the more likely than not thing, because honestly, it's way cheaper and usually it's good enough. So yes, I did when I was in, working for PwC or Deloitte, I wrote tons of opinions because that's just the way we do it. It just in Europe, they're more like memos. You don't guarantee anything, but you advise your client. And honestly, if you do your job right, you don't need, I mean, you do write opinion memos, but they're more like, in email form and advising, or they give you, I was, for example, there were a couple of clients, I was doing the whole tax function for them, like external tax function. One of them, Patron Tequila, what comes to mind, for example, right? So they were fun. And you do these things all the time. It's just that in Europe, there is not so much a distinction between one and another. It's more like typical tax consulting thing. And sometimes you do it in paper form.
Well, I think that this is a great introduction for our students. I will say, if you want to learn more, take, as Judge Vasquez said at the beginning, a class like tax penalties and prosecutions or tax procedure. And also, you'll soon learn that um, there are rules that will apply to the advice that you give, even if it's not in a fancy memo, even if it's just in an email or a text. And so again, things to look forward to in your career in tax, and also a reason to think about taking courses like tax procedure. Another important aspect of tax, and the whole title of this session is Beyond the Code, are the things that we can do outside of just our practice areas or our firms. What are some of the extracurricular tax activities that you have found meaningful during your career? And if I could start with Judge Vasquez, are there any organizations or activities that you've either before becoming a judge or even during that you found to be helpful and an important part of your career?
Thank you, Professor. Well, when I got barred by the Texas bar in 1977, when I graduated from University of Houston, I immediately joined the ABA because I thought we should all join the American Bar Association. But it wasn't until 1982 that I left chief counsel and started private practice in a small firm in San Antonio. Then I was advised by a well-known tax lawyer in San Antonio named Shad Mueller, says, you have to join the ABA tax section and go to the subsections that are important to your practice. At that time, I was representing a lot of clients in collection matters or employment tax matters. And so I went into the ABA meetings. There are 3 per year. And that was so wonderful to my development as a successful tax lawyer in San Antonio. I made friends at the ABA, and so that was truly gratifying and educational. But in regards to what things can you do? Is that what you're?
What other ways to be
Oh,
involved outside of your job?
yes, one of the things I've done through the ABA National Conference of Federal Trial Judges is reach out to high schools and speak to high schools about going to college, going to law school, and that's been tremendously rewarding. And the ABA tax section also has outreach to talk to students, and that's a wonderful feeling. And working with the pro bono, speaking to pro bono, giving speeches to pro bono clinics and the even chief counsel attorneys and IRS attorneys, to anybody that will listen to us about how wonderful it is to work in tax. But thank you, Tom. I
Thank
mean,
you,
Professor.
Lily.
Well, I think my participation has been pretty limited, just getting started in my career, but I was very looking forward to this answer so I could get some ideas on how to participate more, outside of work in areas of tax. We have a Bay Area Young Tax Lawyers organization here, which I've been to a couple of events. Yeah, I'm here to kind of solicit ideas on how I can extend my participation in the tax community.
Well, I have one that I want to mention, but I will in a minute. I just want to give Tom a chance. Go ahead, Tom.
So I think there are two activities which I would like to highlight. One is involved in, we have this Tax Executive Institute, and there are a lot of committees where we work with, right now, for example, we work with OECD on Pillar 2 transactions again. It's like reoccurring theme for the last 20 years, but okay, we are getting somewhere, so that's fine. But the more satisfactory is even mentoring. So I have like 3 to 4 mentees. We speak about once every quarter, because there are a lot of tax professionals who are really good at being tax technical, but then struggle making the next step or can't speak with anyone in the company about the issues they're seeing. So this outreach, it's extremely helpful. And I would say whatever your career is, if you can find a good mentor who wants to work with you, it will really, really boost your career, and it's recommended. And it goes both ways. That's the key. I learn a lot through these sessions as well. So I'm really looking towards every single one we have.
Well, thank you all. The one I did want to mention, and just to kind of emphasize what Judge Vasquez had said, this program is sponsored by the ABA tax section, but we don't want to make it a commercial only about the ABA. However, I will say, when you first get started, it is really important to network and meet people and think about other possible areas in tax that you may not be aware of yet. There are lots of ways to do that. Certainly your local bar may be one of the ways to meet people immediately in the area where you're practicing. The ABA is a national organization. You will meet tax practitioners from across the country. There are 3 meetings a year. One of them is always now virtual in the fall, so you can do it from anywhere. The other 2 are in person. There's a mid-year meeting. This year it was in Los Angeles. And then there's always a big meeting. Our biggest meeting is in Washington, D.C. in May. Thousands of tax lawyers all gathering in D.C. And I think it is one of the most welcoming organizations, especially for new tax lawyers. I joined the ABA right when I got started out of law school, and even as a very junior professor, I found it was a great place for me to meet my colleagues. Not only will you just have a lot of fun, but you'll learn substantive tax law in different areas. There are entire committees devoted, for example, to the topic of basis. I chaired the Teaching Taxation Committee, which covers more policy-focused issues. There's committees that are focused on corporate tax. And in the chat, there's a link for all of you who are students. You can join the tax section at no cost. I would highly recommend you do it, and you will immediately start getting the emails, and you'll know about the events and programs, and you can participate when you graduate. And as I said, it's a very welcoming organization. You can meet people, even as a really junior tax lawyer, who you then end up being connected to for, I will tell you, I'm not trying to create a sales pitch for the ABA, but I will say for decades I've been colleagues with people who I first met at ABA meetings. And so I highly recommend clicking on the link, joining, and I'll be at the meeting in May. So hopefully, if I haven't met you, I will have a chance to meet you at some point at that meeting. Another topic I did want to make sure to ask you about while we're here in our last minutes is, well, I have a couple of things I want to do. First, because Judge Vasquez, you're with us, I think it would be really helpful for our students just to have a sense of the answer to this question. Let's say that you're only interested in working in a large law firm doing transactional tax work. Should you still consider pursuing a clerkship on the tax court or in general? Is a clerkship helpful even for students who are interested in transactional tax work?
Absolutely. Yes. In other words, many of my clerks have ended up in big law firms doing corporate work, partnership work, transactional work. And they got there because they started at the tax court as an attorney advisor or clerk, law clerks as we call them. So that's been, and one of the things I've always thought, honestly, when I was in private practice and for 13 years in San Antonio, was that when I was representing clients in transactions, preparing transactional work, I always thought that it made me a better transactional lawyer by having had 4 years of experience as a tax litigator, because I could see what went wrong. In other words, I could see uh, what as a 4 year with 4 years of experience in tax litigation, I could see transactions that went wrong, and so that experience when I was working on a transaction, I would always, how is this going to be interpreted by the other side? How is it going to be interpreted by a court? So you're always, so yes, but it all depends on, yes, if you have the opportunity to get a clerkship, whether at the U.S. District Court or U.S. Tax Court or even in the state courts, by all means, it's worth pursuing. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The last question I'm asking now, again, on behalf of all the students, because I think this is also something that they might be thinking and didn't come up, so I'm just going to ask it for them. I know that each of you participate in interviews. You're interviewing potential associates or employees or clerks. What is something that a candidate does that makes you want to hire them at the end? I basically would just love to hear each of your thoughts on what makes somebody a really attractive candidate who you want to hire at the end of the interview. Maybe Judge Vasquez, if I could start with you thinking about clerk.
Yes. Well, you know, when I've always hired a clerk, they're gonna be with me for 2 years, and I'm looking to see what connects me to that applicant. Uh, I know that all the people that I interview, they're well qualified. So we're down to, I'm trying to make my mind between one of 3 or 4 people that I have in mind. I look to see their passion for tax. Were they did they do the tax returns under VITA through the IRS for low-income taxpayers or for veterans, military veterans? Were they in the tax law society in their law school? Did they start a tax law society? In other words, are they involved with their state tax association or with the American Bar Association, which is free to students? And then I look to see I always like to ask the students, what do you consider home? Where did you grow up? And sometimes I've hired people based on what's on their resume. You're starting a discussion, as to they might be from a particular state like Texas or Ohio or even Buffalo, New York. Because I've been in those, and sometimes I hire people from parts of the country I haven't even been to, so I can learn where they're from. So yeah, I'm trying to make that connection so we can have a relationship that grows.
And
Thank you, Professor.
I certainly hope you've had several students say the Internal Revenue Code is home. I hope that you've had that answer, but maybe somebody will say it now. Can I ask you, Lily? I know you probably are involved in recruiting. What makes you click the box when you submit it to continue, or at least think about hiring the candidate?
Yeah. So for any law students who, gone through the OCI process, or I've heard there's not really an OCI process anymore, but the screener interviews are really short. They're only 15 minutes long usually. And so you really have to you have 15 minutes to make that impression. And I think the best advice that I've ever gotten when I was doing mock interviews, ahead of the hiring cycle, is that you want to have a story. I think a lot of people's answers are going to sound the same, but it's kind of the way that you tell it and how you kind of integrate it into your story and who you are as a person is, what leaves a mark on people. And so, when I was kind of practicing, everything kind of ties back into my story. So that's kind of how I approach doing interviews. And when I'm interviewing someone, that's what I look for as well. You only have 15 minutes to glean so much information from a person. So if you're able to kind of tell a succinct story with your answers, I think your interviewers will, that will make a lasting impression on your interviewers. And then, for tax specifically, I look to make sure that people have had a demonstrated interest, taking tax classes, being in tax organizations, things like that.
Thank you. And finally, Tom.
It's not easy to be on either side because, when we are doing interviews, we are looking for somebody we know will work together for a long time. So I think what we're looking for is, yes, there is somebody who can show they are better than the rest, but then you're also looking for some personal connection or something basically what we're looking for is even if the person doesn't have answers to all the questions we have, we need to have this trust that they will figure out solution and they will work so long on this to figure out solution and then they are reliable. So that's, I think, the best you can do at the early stage. And then what Lily said and what Judge Vasquez said, if you can show anything how you're better than anyone else, do it. It's recommended. You need to stand out.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists and all of our participants this afternoon. I think this has been, for me personally, I'll say I've learned a lot, and it's really great, as you can tell, to hear about how a general theme running throughout everybody's answers is how much they enjoy the practice of tax. So if you're thinking about tax, hopefully this is going to encourage you to keep pursuing that goal. And certainly, as I said, think about joining the ABA tax section, especially as students, since you can do that for free. There were a lot of people behind the scenes in organizing this event, so I just wanted to very quickly thank the membership, the teaching taxation, and the diversity committees for all coming together to co-sponsor today's event. Importantly, I wanted to thank some specific people: Andres Verdugo, Genevieve Borello, Haley Williams, and Adam Abrams, and Jay Smith, who were all involved in helping to invite our speakers and design today's program. But most importantly, I would like to again just thank our speakers, Judge Vasquez and Lily and Tom, for joining us today and sharing your experiences with all of our students. Thank you very much, everyone.